Well, good evening. I was talking to Deacon Scott before the 11 a.m. Mass this morning, and I was saying there's so much information for this feast of Pentecost that I really have like 3 homilies I could give. Which one do you think I should give? And Deacon Scott in his wisdom said, the best one. So we've yet to see if that's true. We do celebrate this feast of Pentecost, this giving of the Holy Spirit that comes to us, this divine gift of grace, of love, of all that the Holy Spirit gives for us, for gifts, for peace. We know that St. Paul says in the book of Galatians that the fruit of the Spirit in our lives is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. I always forget this, Deacon Scott. Well, I know that's the last one. Self-control. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, goodness, I think, and self-control. That's one of the gifts of the Spirit, right? So one of the gifts of the Spirit is wisdom, but those fruits of the Spirit, and we want those to be operative in our lives. We see them as that kind of gift of God for us. And we know that the Spirit is described for us as being this wellspring of life-giving water within us, right? It will never be thirsty again if we come and we drink of the water of the Holy Spirit. That it breaks open our hearts and gives us hearts of flesh, hearts of compassion, hearts of love towards others. And there's really 3 areas in which this gift of the Holy Spirit is operative for us and in us. The first is us personally, that work of the Spirit through the gift of our baptism and through the gift of confirmation where we're sealed in the Spirit, that a life of God itself dwells within us and motivates us and moves us and draws us closer into the gift of God's eternal love. And we reflect that more and more. The Spirit is at work all the time, summoning us, comforting us, calling us, moving us, right? That Spirit is alive and at work for us. Then also within the church, it happens for us in 2 great ways. One, we heard from the second reading in Paul, all these gifts that are given for the church, for ministry in the church, for the building up of the body, and then also in the gift of unity. So we have this great diversity of different people and personalities and relationships and talents and abilities, and this great unity of love. Right? So the Holy Spirit gives us these 2 great gifts for the gift of to the church, and then beyond that, we call on the Holy Spirit to renew the face of the earth, right? That through the work of that love in our lives, of that grace in our lives, we move then out into the world, to being able to serve in the areas of peace, of justice, of compassion, of helping and serving in charity those who are poor or who are in need. That's something that motivates us to touch the most outcast of human society, to try to lift them up and to show them Christ's love and to receive Christ's love through them. That's all a work of that Holy Spirit, right? And yet, if you're like me, a lot of times we kind of get stuck. We don't feel like all those things are happening in our lives. And part of the reason there were 3 homilies is because I could go into each one of those areas, right? Each of those things and talk about it more in depth. But a lot of times we feel like we're not experiencing those gifts or those fruits of the Spirit in our lives. It feels like we're kind of reaching an edge or an end point, or we just feel like, maybe especially over the last 2.5 months, like it's Groundhog Day, right? Like the same thing just keeps happening in our own spiritual walk with God. And so I thought I'd go a little bit deeper today into that area in particular, into the sort of personal area. And there are other ways to look at it, but I'll look at it primarily in one direction. That I think that there is this sense of the Holy Spirit's gift that doesn't operate in us, or we get stuck or in the same routine sometimes because there's things that we continue to hold on to. When we celebrate this feast, we know that it's the completion of the Paschal mystery. The Paschal mystery is the fancy word we use for the suffering, death, resurrection, ascension, and sending of the Spirit of Jesus. That's like one event, the Paschal mystery, in which all those things happen. Sometimes we talk about it just as the death and resurrection of Jesus, but it has this kind of corporate sense, this inclusive sense of all these pieces to it. And so we usually want to think of the Holy Spirit, if we do think of him, as being that thing that enlivens us, that we get to the gifts part, the good part, the different parts of the body, the energy and life and vitality of God in our community, and we like to be here. But the Feast of Pentecost is only celebrated after that, at the end of that whole Paschal mystery. And so we have to go through death first. We have to let go of some things. We have to go through the process of really grieving those things, coming to accept the loss of them before we can enter into the freedom that comes from the gift of the Holy Spirit. We see this played out in Jesus' own life, that we know that he was aware of his impending death, of the crucifixion he was going to suffer. He was preparing his disciples, apostles, to experience that, to know that he was going to be departing from them for a time, but that he would be raised from the dead, that this was all a part of the plan of God, and he was committed to that. But we see in the Garden of Gethsemane that he actually comes to that deep point of accepting the reality of his own death and crucifixion with the words, "Not my will, but your will be done." Through tears and sweat like blood, "Not my will, but your will be done." What do we call that time? We call that the agony in the garden. And we like to get to the life part, but each of us have our own agony in the garden of coming to terms with the things that we're holding on to, the things in our lives that are barriers, the things that we need to let go of, to let the Spirit bring us to new life, to let the Spirit fill us, to let the Spirit send us. And so that can be in all kinds of different areas of our lives. In particular, for many of us, it's a sin that we hold on to. It's something we're comfortable with, that maybe even borders on addiction. And we can know that from the world of addiction, we learn something about our ability to see. In addictions, often we can't see a life without that substance or that behavior. We can't imagine something more or something different. We can't think of going through the rest of life without having that thing in our lives. And sometimes sin works in our lives in the same way, that we're holding on to those things, but the Holy Spirit does give us a new vision and a new horizon. Pope Francis had said that the Holy Spirit gives us a new horizon and a definite direction. And so as we're looking at what maybe it's sin in our lives, we have to realize that there's a new possibility of living in a different way, of living without that favorite sin of ours. And maybe we have to get to that point of the agony in the garden to let go of that sin. Of course, it's not just about sin, it's about other areas of our lives and other things that could be happening with relationships or with our own pride around things or our own sense of control around things. And sometimes it takes something to kind of shock us out of being in that moment. It could be something tragic like the death of a loved one. It could be something wonderful like the birth of a child. It could be something universal like a global pandemic, right? But we're in a moment where we can focus on what do we need to let go of? What do we need to let go of to let the Spirit come and let us be alive? And so I want to ask you to do that today, to think about what is maybe the one thing, the most important thing that you're holding on to that you know is in the way of getting deeper into relationship and the flow of the Holy Spirit. What is there? And as we celebrate this Eucharist, and thank God we're here to be able to celebrate the Eucharist together. And it is kind of funny. So this is actually about putting that part of our lives to death. And so as we gather back and there's this joy of being with one another, it's like, okay, now die to yourself, right? But that's real and deep. And as we celebrate this Eucharist, as we offer the gift of bread and wine here on the altar, I encourage you to sacrifice to God that thing that you're holding on to and you need to let go of. To sacrifice to God that thing that has a grip on you that's keeping you from experiencing freedom. To sacrifice to God that thing that is preventing the Holy Spirit from flowing into our lives, into each of your lives. And so, I'll do the same thing, right? But it's an opportunity for us to really pay attention to the paschal mystery, to the suffering, the death, and resurrection of Jesus, but to the pattern that follows in our own lives, that we can fall to the ground and die so that the fruit of the Spirit can be born in us. And that allows that gift of the Spirit that we celebrate today. On this, the birthday of the church, the very life of God is given to us. The very breath of God is breathed into us. The very water of life flows up from within our spirits. And let us clear all the clutter out of the way so that that gift can be made manifest, that that gift can be made real, that that gift can be welcomed into our own hearts.